Hello everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today I'll be doing a review of the brand new film from Netflix called Gunpowder Milkshake. What happens when two male feminists decide to write a story about female empowerment? Well, that's when you get Gunpowder Milkshake. Before I go further into my review, please make sure that you smash that like button, that you light up that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey, and also that you are subscribed to the channel, and share this video with anyone that you find or might find this video fun, informative, or entertaining. All right, let's go ahead and dive into this film, directed by Navat Papuchado. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name correctly, but he also was a part of writing the script for the movie, along with Ehud Lafsky, both of which, obviously, are men, which kind of surprised me when I first saw the trailer for this film. Obviously, it is a very female-centric story, and in modern-day Hollywood, typically when you have female-centric stories, you have women behind the camera, women in the director's chair, and in all areas of the filmmaking process, which, if we're dealing with a brand new original film and concept, and if they are indeed the best person for the job, or whoever it's running the show thinks they're the best person for the job, hey, more power to you. But when you have a story like this being portrayed the way that it is and having some of the lines that it has in the movie, it starts to make you kind of ask questions about the, I guess, goals of the director, the goals of the writers of this film, because man, oh man, there are some things in this movie that I actually like, and then there's other parts of this film that are just not well done at all. Let's just talk about the positives first. This cast has no right to be in this kind of a movie. What I mean by that is that the cast is so much better than this movie. The cast is on just an entirely different level than this movie. This movie really honestly should have been one of the best films to come out this year. And unfortunately, it ends up really not hitting that mark at all. If you're kind of wondering about who's in this film, you got Karen Gillan in the leading role. I've always been a fan of Karen Gillan's work. Lena Headey is also here in a supporting role as the mother of Karen Gillan's character. You got Carla Gugino in the film, Chloe Coleman, Michelle Yeoh is in this movie. Yeah, that's right, Michelle Yeoh is in this movie. Angela Bassett is in this movie. You also have Paul Giamatti in this film. So you've got an incredibly solid cast of characters, and all of the other supporting characters are also very well done as far as the performances are concerned. Where this film, and really that is one of the only positives about this movie, I think that there's aspects of cinematography that work pretty well, though there's a couple of scenes where the framing just doesn't make any sense in the very beginning when Lena Headey is talking to the younger version of Karen Gillan's character. There is this weird framing where the daughter's in like the edge of the frame, but then Lena Headey's in the middle of the frame, and just that kind of back and forth. For me, as someone who pays attention to that kind of stuff, I was kind of confused as to why that was the case. There was no real balance to those back and forth shots. So, you know, overall the cinematography was pretty good, but again, there were a couple of moments like that where I was kind of scratching my head saying, I don't know about this one specifically, but for the most part, it actually looked pretty good. But other than that, and as I said, the amazing cast, that's pretty much where the positives of this film really end. There's kind of these middle of the road, you know, not too terrible, but not too great elements of the story that I think actually could have led to a pretty good film, or at least a very entertaining film. But it all gets kind of muddied by the clear agenda of these two writers. As I said, what happens when you have two male feminists put into the charge of a film like this, as even my poor little daughter Willow over here, my dog daughter, of course, Willow, is crying over here, and so I gotta pat the doggo's head. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. There you go, Will. Anyway, so even when she's getting upset about this, I look to this film, and it's just very clearly to me that the director and the writers of this film, because obviously they're in tandem with each other, what you end up seeing is you see them attempting at almost every single turn to be like, hey, we respect women. And how do we respect women? How can we show that? Oh, let's have this really awesome action sequence featuring women. Let's also have the action sequence, for the most part, based on what I could tell, featuring the actual actors doing a lot of the stunt work. Obviously, there was probably some stunt teams involved too. But in doing that, and in having the actors who are not all trained fighters, what you ended up having was some really bad choreography for the fighting. The fight choreography for this film at times is downright cringeworthy. If you've ever seen Star Wars The Last Jedi, you know that any person who actually pays attention to the fight sequences, especially in the throne room scene in The Last Jedi, have broken that scene down to say, this fighting makes no sense and it's just downright stupid. That's the kind of fighting that happens in this movie too. There's just so many moments where you're looking at it saying, this is just not very well choreographed fighting. It's not even that well shot fighting either. It's not really hiding any of these different elements. Like typically this is when you would see, and I guess you could say an example would be more of a modern film like Black Widow. Black Widow has a big problem as far as the editing is concerned, but normally when you have a high profile action sequence, normally editing is one of the tools that filmmakers will use to try and hide certain elements of the fighting, either trying to hide the fact that it's not very well choreographed or trying to hide them switching back and forth between the actor and the stunt double. And I'm glad that that film, or rather that this film specifically, Gunpowder Milkshake, doesn't do that. But in the end, it also makes it very apparent by showing everything that it's not well choreographed, that it just doesn't look very good and downright cringeworthy. In fact, there's several moments when, again, this film is supposed to be grounded in, you know, obviously a fictional universe, but it is still grounded in reality for all that we can tell. And when you have these characters who are clearly a lot smaller and therefore a lot less muscular than their counterparts, their male counterparts, because this film is all about men versus women. Again, every single tension, every single fight is always between a man or a woman. And there's moments when they're literally like trying to do feat of strength. It's, even if you were to say this is the strongest woman in the world, you would look to the scene and say this just logically does not make any sense. I always hate when movies try and put these fight sequences in such a way where they're supposed to be on equal footing with each other, when in reality what it should be is, okay, so obviously in most situations, because just statistically this is a fact, that the man would be more powerful in the situation, but that could allow the woman to be more cunning, could be allowing the woman to be a lot more quick and a lot more, you know, thinking on their toes. And there's moments in the fight sequences in the film where you do see some of that. I think especially with Michelle Yeoh's character during some of her fight sequences, I think that obviously with her being someone who is no stranger to being in action sequences, again, very well known for doing films like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, for instance, I think that it kind of shows a little bit. But in almost all the other fight sequences with all of the other characters, there are just always these moments that just logically don't make a whole lot of sense. But that wouldn't even be that much of an issue for me if the fight sequences were any good in the first place. So you have this really cringe fight sequence that happens in a bowling alley. It's supposed to be looking very stylistic. There's a lot of colors going on. There's this really cool wide shot showing the different events of what's going on. But then you look to the actual sequence itself and the moves that are being done, and they're just illogical. They just don't make any sense. And again, it's just very poor choreography. Then you jump to the very end of the movie where there's this final fight sequence that happens in the actual diner that is featured throughout the movie. And in that entire sequence, you're thinking to yourself, wait a minute, why is this character spinning at this moment, ignoring this one person who they've clearly seen going after them, so that they can then go after someone else who's still like 5 feet away from them? And then you also have other moments where they're doing, again, it's all in slow-mo, which makes it even worse because you can see literally the thinking going into the choreography, which is one of the worst things that can happen. If I can look at a sequence in a film and know exactly what move is coming next, or I can look at it and say, oh, this is very clearly a worked out stunt, and you can tell that the actors are working on a time schedule here, that's not a very good thing to be seen in the movie. And so you have tons of that happening in the slow-mo, and it's all in slow motion in a wide shot, so you can see every single element of this, and then there's no real way of hiding it. So the fight sequences in this movie are just really not good. The writing in this movie is also not good. It's very derivative of other films that have just done it better. Films like, for instance, John Wick, obviously more recent films like Nobody. And again, obviously Nobody is definitely derivative in many ways of John Wick in certain stylings. But this film also is having not just being derivative, but where this film and Nobody are different is that Nobody was actually an entertaining, fun movie with pretty well done choreographed action sequences, where this one just wasn't. It just wasn't. It did not have those well-crafted sequences that really needed to be in this movie for it to really be entertaining at all. In fact, this film ends up being boring for much of its runtime. And speaking of that, it's an hour, and it's 114 minutes, so it's almost a 2-hour movie. And honestly, I feel like a film like this could have been better to take the route that Nobody did, where Nobody was a lot closer to the 90 or hour 45 minute mark. This one, I think, went on just maybe a little bit too long, and it just really didn't make a whole lot of sense. So again, the fight sequences aren't very good. The writing isn't very good. And then some of the dialogue too. It's just really cringeworthy. I mentioned this on social media, but one of the lines in this movie, and this is again very much showing of what's going on behind the scenes as far as the, again, male feminists writing this movie, was that you have a character, the very end, there's the big boss character talking to Karen Gillan's character, and one of the lines that he says is literally, "I always considered myself to be a feminist." When you have a character in a movie saying a line, "I've always considered myself to be a feminist," that is very clear indication that the people behind the camera are trying to make that apparent in the actual film itself. And I think that also helps us to understand and realize all of the other decisions that they made in the process of making this movie, that it was not about telling a really badass story. It was not about trying to entertain people. It was rather trying to push this weird agenda in their story, which again is really sad because the actors are fantastic and do the best work they can with the material that they're given. And in the story itself, there are some pretty cool elements. As I said, there's some inspiration in a lot of ways from the world built by John Wick, where there's this library, and this is where you open an account, and they're talking in these coded languages and coded terms with the books, and each book's representing different types of weapons. Again, I thought that was kind of interesting, though also, of course, all of the weapons were indicated by female authors. So again, a very, very female-centric, and I think that one of the reasons why this film might end up getting flack from a lot of critics is because I think they're going to look at this and say, okay, the fact that this is written by two men make us hate the movie. If this was written by two women, well, then we would be okay with it because this is female empowerment. But when it's written by two men who are very clearly overcompensating and trying to make it very clear, hey, look, we're feminists. Look how strong the women are in this film. I think that a lot of people would actually look to this, and real true feminists would say, yeah, I find that a bit derivative. I find that a bit offensive, that you feel like you have to do the film in this way, in this capacity, and that you can't just tell a regular story and not have to just overdo it as such, especially when you have such a talented cast in the first place. But overall, you're looking at a film, it's men versus women every single time. All of the men are evil. Also, too, you have, again, basically these 5 women here who are able to take on about, 100 men at one point. And obviously, there are situations in films where you look at people like John Wick, who can take out an entire army, it seems, by himself. But it does kind of make you ask the question, especially during the action sequences, of the logic behind it all, because every single time they show these men, they are incompetent. At the very least with John Wick, you do feel like in certain fight sequences that there are stakes, that there is this clear discrepancy, where in the vast majority of the fight sequences in this movie, you never really feel like those stakes are there. You always feel like one side is very clearly better than the other, and obviously, because this is written by male feminists, it is the female side of it that is always pretty much on top of it. And yeah, it's just bad. By the way, I'm reminded of another line. So similar, in the same sequence where "I've always considered myself to be a feminist" line happens, you then also have the guy telling this story about how he always had girls, right? He was the father of girls, and even though he loved his girls, he never understood them. He never quite understood them. Then he had a son. And when he had his son, he understood his son. And then you killed my son. And now I feel alone again. Now you've created isolation for me. And I'm just thinking to myself, this is the dumbest backstory I've ever heard. So the reason why he's mad is because now he feels alone because he doesn't understand women. I've always considered myself to be a feminist, but I just don't understand women. And I think that is actually true of these directors here, because I feel like women would probably look to this story and say, yeah, please don't speak on my behalf. Thank you very much. But again, that's my own take on that. So again, great cast, some interesting concepts in the actual writing of the story. I would like to see Karen Gillan in some more leading roles, because I think that she's a very talented actress. And again, her and Lena Headey, I think, also work very well together. Unfortunately, they are apparently working on a sequel, so it's apparently doing well enough for them to have and to be in talks for that, and so we'll wait and see. And obviously, I would not be surprised if they either just nix the director and writing team, or they bring on a female writer or something to that effect, and then that would just make the next movie probably even worse in that capacity. So again, is it a full-out woke fest necessarily? I wouldn't say it's a full-out woke fest. However, just built into the actual story itself, it's very clear that you have two male feminists that are trying to really make it clear to all women everywhere that they respect women. And again, it's just it's cringeworthy at times. So if I had to give this film a grade, I'd probably give it a C-. And really, the only reason why it's even that high is because, again, you have a great cast here. You have some, for the most part, good cinematography, though there are, as I mentioned, a couple of issues with it. And again, there's some interesting concepts built into the story itself. But really, it's the cast that makes this worth watching at all, but I would say it's well below average, and it's probably not even worth your time unless you're willing to work through some of these things. But anyway, what are your thoughts about Gunpowder Milkshake? Yes, Gunpowder Milkshake. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you like this video, smash that like button, light up that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey. It really does mean a lot. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my July Patreon and Subscribe Star members: Andrew Hoyle, Biffer de Hobbit, Brian P., Dion, Don Bruno de la Mancha, Father Christopher Miller, hail to you, Father, Father Damian Cook, Garrett Searles, Harold Francis, Inflamed Wood, It's a Trap Productions, Jason Clark, Jacob Juice, Jeffrey Toone, Jonathan Carney, Laura the Modern Major General's Story, Mike Jackson, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mr. Peabody and his evil twin with the beautiful hair, On to June, Orange Hat Reviews, Out of Step with Reality, Priscilla Hall, Riff Magos, Rosetta Allen, Teresa Martin, Theodore Bendon, Tina B, and Tina Bojan. Thank you all very much for supporting me over on Patreon, and also to my Subscribe Star members: Fast Reaction, Nosferatu Gatsu, John B, Perpetual Punster, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, J. Alex McCarthy Jr., Dean Heiss / the new number 2, J. Ra the Beer Guru, and ZK Man. And I also want to make sure to shout out my Locals members. I am now available over at locals.com, and I've got 2 monthly supporters over there. The first of my local supporters is Goblin Squatch. Shout out to you, good sir. And also, I now have a second supporter over on locals.com, and that is Robert Barnes. Shout out to both of you very much. Thank you very much for supporting me on that new platform at the Keeper of the Bifrost level. If you want to find out more information about that, go check out my Locals page. You can find the link in the description, and it tells you everything that you would get in that Keeper of the Bifrost level, which is right now the only level available on that platform. And I also want to make sure to shout out any new Patreon members, and for right now, I want to shout out Mondo Spieler, who is my newest member over on Patreon. Thank you all very much for being here today. And if you want to have your name shouted out at the end of every single live stream and video on the channel, please make sure to check out the links in the description of ways that you can support me over on Patreon and Subscribe Star as well. It gives you access to things like giveaways of Blu-rays, 4Ks, and digital codes. Also, access to a podcast that I do with John the Flick Pick Flickinger, where we have a lot of fun. We also answer Q&A questions as well. And also, you might get access to the Chosen of Valhalla level, which gives you access to a once-a-month podcast exclusively, where I bring on you to the main channel with everyone else who is at the level, and we all just talk about movies, pop culture, and tons of fun stuff like that. And also, of course, Tina, who is the Empress of the Universe, is going to give us tons of reviews of movies and also maybe a couple of awesome rants here and there as well. So if that sounds fun to you, make sure you go ahead and check out those links. Again, you're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.